For 40 years, every first Thursday of the month, that woman would knock on my door. It was a routine as predictable and unyielding as the tides, a silent ritual that defined our seemingly respectable life. She always brought fresh vegetables and bread that was still warm, claiming my mother-in-law had sent the provisions. I would thank her, offer her coffee, watch her leave, and then I would promptly close the door, often feeling a rush of inexplicable relief. That was how it went, month after month, decade after decade. I never once imagined that behind the sheer mundanity of those monthly deliveries lay the darkest, most carefully guarded secret a family could ever hold. A devastating secret that everyone in the quiet town knew about. Absolutely everyone but me. And when the crushing truth finally broke through, it wasn't because of anything I chose to do. It was pure, undeniable chance. It took the simple curiosity of my adopted daughter, Diane, and a consumer DNA test, a little thing she took out of a deeper need for answers, to violently tear down 40 years of meticulously constructed lies. Lies that had been protected by the terrifying, generations-long silence of an entire community. Hello, my name is Mary, and I am 78 years old. For the majority of my life, I truly believed I was a fortunate wife, married to Donald, a respectable man from a good, upstanding family. I had convinced myself that the pervasive difficulties in our marriage were just typical struggles, that his constant, deep silences were merely a trait of his somber character, and that his frequent absences were solely due to the demands of his important work. I believed everything they wanted me to believe. Because when a lie is built big enough, and it is repeated with enough conviction for long enough, that monstrous lie ceases to be fiction and hardens into the only reality you know. I lived completely within that manufactured reality for decades, utterly oblivious, while everyone around me was deeply aware of the fiction. My story begins in the late 50s, in a small town nestled in the American Midwest, where people didn't just know each other, they were deeply intertwined. A place where profound secrets should, logically, have been impossible to keep. Or so I foolishly thought at the time. I was a young girl from an honest, decent family, raised strictly with all the traditional values of that period: respect, honor, and unquestioning devotion. My father, Raymond, was a clerk at the local municipal office, and my mother, Shirley, devoted herself entirely to our home and our education, with that peculiar blend of gentle firmness that only mothers of that era truly mastered. We were certainly not wealthy, but we were absolutely respected, and in those years, the social currency of respect commanded far more influence than mere gold. I met Donald one sunny Sunday afternoon in May, just as everyone was streaming out after the church service. I was 19. He was 30. He was a mature, established man, intensely confident, with that stiff, upright posture that proclaimed he was raised in a family of great consequence. His parents owned vast tracts of land and multiple properties. They were unquestionably one of the most prominent families in the county. His mother was known simply as the Mrs. by everyone, and his father was a man who was respected and profoundly feared in equal measure. When Donald began showing an active, focused interest in me, my mother was nearly speechless with disbelief. "Mary," she whispered to me one night, her needle flashing near the lamp's light, "this man is a blessing, a true gift from the Lord. It just doesn't happen to every young girl to attract the eye of someone like him." The courtship that followed was brief, but intense. Donald came to visit me at home 3 times a week, always in the late afternoon, and always with my mother strategically positioned in the next room, close enough to carefully monitor every word. He would bring luxurious sweets from the best bakery, beautifully embroidered handkerchiefs, and small, thoughtful gifts that made my mother's eyes truly sparkle. He spoke of our future together with an absolute certainty that was immensely reassuring to my young heart. He painted detailed pictures of the comfortable house we would share, the beautiful children we would raise, and the quiet, serene life that awaited me by his side. "You will be a lady, Mary," he promised, taking my hand with delicate gentleness. "You will lack for absolutely nothing. I promise you." And I believed him completely. It was genuinely impossible not to. He was unfailingly kind, deeply thoughtful, and utterly respectful. Never a single gesture out of place, never a word that could be considered improper. He was precisely the kind of man every mother dreamed of for her daughter. After a 6-month engagement, he proposed marriage. The proposal took place in our living room, with both my parents present. He knelt down, presented me with a heavy gold band set with a small glowing ruby, and asked, "Mary, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" I accepted, my eyes instantly filling with tears. My mother openly wept with happiness. My father solemnly shook Donald's hand, the gesture of a man receiving an immense favor. The wedding was celebrated 3 months later at the town's main church. It was a grand social event that people in town still vividly remember. I wore a pure white gown that my mother had lovingly sewn, working night and day, adorned with lace and intricate embroidery that looked like a true work of art. As I walked down the long aisle on my father's arm, I felt the intense focus of every eye on me. The stares of my former schoolmates were filled with palpable envy. The stares of the older, established ladies were full of heavy approval. And then there were the cold stares of Donald's family. It was right there, inside that church, that I saw Sharon for the first time. Donald's younger sister. She was seated rigidly in the front pew, directly beside her mother, and she wore a dark, somber dress, a completely unsuitable choice for a wedding. She had a distant, vacant look. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and her shoulders were deeply hunched, as if carrying some heavy, invisible weight. She did not smile. She looked at absolutely no one. She seemed to desperately want to simply disappear. When our eyes met for just a fraction of a second, I saw something in hers that I simply could not decipher. It was not happiness. It was not curiosity. It was something far more profound and much darker. Something that felt intensely like fear. But that day, I was far too overwhelmed with my own emotions to truly pay attention to it. It was, I truly believed, the happiest day of my entire life. The first few months of our marriage were a slow, careful period of adjustment. We moved into a small house Donald's family had prepared for us, modest but perfectly respectable, with 2 bedrooms and a spacious kitchen. Donald worked constantly throughout the day as a merchant, traveling often to surrounding towns to handle buying and selling. My days were entirely dedicated to managing the house, cooking, cleaning, and patiently waiting for his return. It was a quiet life, perhaps a little too solitary, but I constantly told myself that this was simply normal. Wives waited. It was their role, and I was good at waiting. What was decidedly not normal, however, were the visits. They began approximately 6 months after our wedding. Every first Thursday of the month, punctual as a clock, Sharon would knock on the door. She would arrive carrying a large canvas tote bag overflowing with fresh produce, bread baked at home, and occasionally some cheese or cured meat. "My mother sends this," she would announce in a soft, faint voice, always avoiding my eyes. "She says it should last you for the week." At first, I honestly thought it was a kind, generous gesture. Donald's family was well off, and supporting family members was a common, expected social practice. I thanked her, took the heavy bag, and sincerely invited Sharon to step inside for a cup of coffee. "No, thank you," she would always reply. "I really need to get back." But she wouldn't leave right away. She would stand there, right on the threshold, perfectly still, as if she were desperately waiting for something. She would peer intently into the house, as though she were searching for a specific person. And then, after a few minutes of agonizing, awkward silence, she would rush away, moving quickly, almost running. It was undeniably strange, but I didn't let myself dwell on that strangeness. Not yet. The visits continued, identical and unwavering, month after month. Every first Thursday, precisely at the same time. Sharon would arrive, hand over the bag, pause for those few unsettling minutes, and then vanish. She never spoke about her own life, never asked me a single question, and never offered a smile. She was truly like a phantom that would briefly materialize and then instantly dissolve. After a year of marriage, a new, agonizing worry began to consume me. I was not getting pregnant. Every month that passed was a hope cruelly disappointed, every cycle an unanswered prayer. The women in the town started whispering openly when they saw me at the market. "Perhaps she is unable to have children," they would murmur under their breath. "Maybe Donald should have chosen someone else." But Donald himself never seemed remotely concerned. In fact, whenever I tried to discuss it, he would change the subject with a shocking speed that always wounded me deeply. "Don't think about it, Mary," he would dismiss. "These things happen when they're simply meant to happen." And then he would add a statement, spoken with a finality that allowed no reply. "It's not important." It is not important? How could he say that? How could it be dismissed? Having children was the fundamental social purpose of marriage. It was the one thing expected of a proper wife. And he claimed it held no importance? But I didn't dare to challenge him. A wife did not openly contradict her husband, not in those restrictive years. 2 more long years went by. Sharon's routine visits continued, always on time, always exactly the same. And I started to pick up on other small, strange details. Every single time Sharon came, Donald invariably found some urgent excuse not to be home. "I have to go visit a major client," he'd declare, or "I have pressing work out on the property." Always something that kept him meticulously away during the precise hours his own sister came to me. At first, I kept telling myself it was a coincidence. But coincidences, when they repeat with perfect consistency, inevitably stop being coincidences. One Thursday morning, I finally decided to break the routine and force a change. When Sharon arrived, I insisted more than usual that she come in. "Sharon, please step inside. Let's talk for a little while." "We are sisters-in-law, aren't we? We should really get to know each other." She froze instantly. She visibly hesitated. For a brief moment, I saw something intense flash in her eyes. Fear? Panic? I still couldn't tell. But then she instantly lowered her gaze and slowly shook her head. "I can't. I must leave." "But where must you rush off to?" I pressed, perhaps with too direct a tone. "At least stay and have a cup of coffee." "No," she said, her voice now a strained whisper. "I simply cannot." And she fled, leaving faster than she ever had before. That evening, when Donald got home, I recounted the entire episode to him. I was desperate to see his reaction. "Your sister was here today," I commented, setting the dinner table. "I tried to make her stay and relax for a bit, but she rushed out. Is she always that skittish?" Donald didn't respond immediately. He continued eating in heavy silence, his eyes fixed down on his plate. Then, after what felt like an eternal wait, he finally spoke. "Sharon has certain issues. Don't push her." "What kind of issues?" I pushed back. "Her own issues," he replied, using a cold tone that instantly closed the subject. "They are strictly none of our business. But they were our business. Or at the very least, they were swiftly becoming my business. I began to observe everything with surgical intensity. I paid closer attention to every minor detail that had once slipped past me. And those details slowly started to weave together a narrative that I knew in my core I did not want to hear. I noticed, for instance, that the money Donald allotted me for running the house was consistently insufficient. "I must contribute funds to the family needs," he would vaguely explain whenever I asked for an accounting. "You know how it is. My father has expenses." But his father was wealthy. He owned land, houses, and had rental incomes. Why did Donald have to constantly help him? And then there were the disappearances. Donald would frequently vanish for long stretches of time, claiming he had work obligations. But his business ventures did not seem to be flourishing. In fact, sometimes he looked deeply preoccupied, tense, as if he were carrying a tremendously heavy, invisible burden. One night, while he was deep asleep, I made the unprecedented decision to search his wallet. I found receipts, addressed to an unfamiliar name and an address I did not recognize. An address far outside the town limits, deep in the open countryside. The very next day, I fabricated an excuse, a visit to a distant friend, and set out to find that location. I walked for nearly an hour, navigating dusty, unpaved roads, bordered by trees and old stone walls. And finally, I found it. A tiny, isolated house, almost swallowed by the overgrown vegetation. A house with its shutters tightly closed, that looked inhabited, yet felt strangely silent. I crept closer, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I desperately wanted to knock, to demand an explanation, but just as my hand was about to make contact with the door, I heard a sound, a woman's voice, softly singing a lullaby. I froze entirely. I listened intently. And in that familiar, quiet voice, I clearly recognized Sharon. But why was Sharon here, in this remote, secret place? And who exactly was she singing that gentle lullaby to? I simply did not have the courage to knock. I retreated, turning back confused, frightened, and overflowing with questions that I still didn't dare to form into words. That evening, I looked at Donald, and I saw him through utterly new eyes. I desperately searched his face for any response, any sign, anything that could possibly explain the impossible thing that was happening. But he remained completely impenetrable. He ate, he read his paper, and he went to bed. Just as he always did. As if nothing at all was wrong. And I continued my silence. Because in those restrictive years, a wife could not risk making an accusation without concrete proof. She could not risk asking the uncomfortable questions. She had to endure. She had to stay silent. She had to pretend. But silence always demands a terrible price, and I was beginning to realize how high the cost of mine would be. I continued my silence. For weeks I stayed awake at night, tormented by the images of Sharon's strange, silent visits and the haunting melody of the lullaby I had heard in that remote, hidden house. I was trapped in the marriage, in the suffocating social expectations of the era, and most powerfully, in my own fear. A wife could not accuse without concrete, undeniable proof. She had to bear the burden, keep quiet, and pretend. But the financial strain, which had been a quiet symptom all along, began to worsen, adding pressure to the emotional weight. I had tried, in those early years, to question the perpetual lack of funds, asking Donald for an accounting. He had waved away my concerns with the same vague justification. "I have to help the family," he would say. "My father has expenses." But my father-in-law was rich. He owned land, houses, and had reliable rents. The idea that Donald needed to consistently siphon off funds for his wealthy father was a piece of the lie that crumbled the moment I found those unexplained receipts. The money was clearly going elsewhere, supporting a secret life. Donald's business dealings seemed to be suffering, and he looked perpetually tense, carrying some immense private burden. The money was missing to cover up his frequent disappearances and the expenses of that remote house. Years passed. 10, then 15, then 20 more years faded into the past. Sharon's unsettling visits persisted, right on schedule, always exactly the same. I continued to receive her, thank her, and watch her retreat. And I continued living my life right alongside Donald, next to a man who felt increasingly distant, increasingly like a complete stranger sharing my space. We hardly spoke at all anymore. He worked, I managed the house. In the evenings, we ate in almost total silence. At night, we shared the same bed, but we were fundamentally separated by a vast, invisible emotional wall. I never had children of my own, and with the passing of the years, I stopped even wishing for them. How could a woman possibly want to bring a life into the world when her own existence already felt so profoundly lifeless? But the crushing truth, when it finally decides to arrive, doesn't bother asking for permission. It simply bursts in, trampling over everything in its path. It was my daughter who brought everything crashing down. The daughter I never conceived with Donald, but whom we formally adopted when I was already 42 years old. Her name was Diane. She was 3 when she arrived in our lives, the child of a distant cousin of Donald's who had tragically passed away during childbirth. The father had explicitly refused her, and the family were unable to take on the responsibility. And so, after over 2 decades of a sterile marriage, we finally became parents. Donald agreed to the adoption with a swiftness that actually startled me. "Very well," he agreed, without giving it any apparent thought. "Bring her home." There was no real enthusiasm in his voice, no obvious flicker of joy. It was almost as though he were merely accepting an obligation, a duty to fulfill. But I was so completely overjoyed to finally have a little girl to raise that I pushed all my existing doubts aside. I desperately didn't want my suspicions to ruin the preciousness of that moment. Diane grew up beautiful and smart. She had a strong, curious nature, always ready with a thoughtful question. She was everything I had ever hoped for in a daughter. Donald, however, maintained his emotional distance. He was never actively cruel to her, just absent. As if Diane were merely an object in the house, something that existed but wasn't important enough to pay attention to. Sharon's unusual visits continued even after Diane's arrival. Every first Thursday of the month, precise as always. But now, when she came, she would look at the little girl with an unsettling intensity that made me feel deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't a look of simple affection. It was something more complex. She seemed to be studying Diane's features with deep concentration, as if she were desperately searching for something specific in her face. "She is a darling child," Sharon managed to say once, her voice noticeably trembling. "Thank you," I replied. "She is our joy." Sharon immediately lowered her gaze. "Yes," she murmured faintly, "it must be wonderful having a daughter." There was an undercurrent of heartbreaking sorrow in the way she spoke those words. It sounded as though she were speaking of something she had profoundly lost, or something she had never once been allowed the right to have. The years continued their relentless march. Diane matured, moved through adolescence, and became a strong, self-reliant woman. She married a wonderful young man from a nearby town at 24 and moved away to begin their own life. I was once again alone with Donald, in a house that now felt less like a home and more like an empty tomb. We communicated barely at all. He aged poorly, becoming steadily more isolated and noticeably gloomier. I aged right beside him, constantly asking myself if this cold, silent existence was truly the life I deserved. Sharon maintained her visits. Even though Diane was grown and gone, even though it was only Donald and me left, she kept coming. Every first Thursday. It was a strict, unyielding ritual that could simply not be interrupted. But over those passing years, another slow change was happening. Sharon was aging too, and the palpable fear I had always observed in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something else entirely. Exhaustion, perhaps, or maybe a deep, profound resignation. It was as if she had carried an immense weight for so long that she finally lacked the very strength to uphold it any longer. One particular day, it was a dreary Thursday in late October, Sharon arrived right on time. But this day, she looked entirely different. Her eyes were swollen and noticeably red, as though she had been weeping intensely. Her hands were visibly shaking as she offered me the heavy bag. "Sharon," I said, my own concern finally breaking through. "Are you feeling quite all right?" She offered no reply. She stared intently inside the house, just as she always did, but this time her gaze was profoundly different. It was desperate. "Where is Donald?" she suddenly asked. "He's not here," I replied. "He went out on business." She nodded slowly, a weary motion. Then, with a voice I had literally never heard her use, a voice stripped bare of its usual faintness, she spoke. "Mary, you never asked the big questions. Did you?" My heart suddenly seized in my chest. "Questions about what, Sharon?" Sharon opened her mouth, clearly preparing to speak. But then she violently shook her head, as if instantly regretting the impulse. "Nothing," she whispered. "Absolutely nothing. Forgive me." And she rushed away, leaving faster than she ever had. That same evening, when Donald finally returned home, I told him every detail. "Your sister was very strange today. She seemed on the absolute verge of telling me something important." Donald's face went utterly white. I saw the color vanish from his features for a stark moment, then slowly flood back in. "What did she want to say?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "She stopped right in the middle of it." Donald sat in complete silence for a very long minute. Then he spoke with a voice that was hard and commanding. "If Sharon comes here again, you are not to let her cross the threshold. I do not want her troubling you." "But she is your own sister," I protested softly. "It does not matter," he insisted. "You will not let her in." It was a cold, absolute order, not a request, and I, as I always had, meekly obeyed. But Sharon never came back. The following Thursday, the provisions bag was brought by a local neighbor. "Sharon isn't doing well," the neighbor told me. "She asked me to bring this over." "What is wrong with her?" I asked, a fresh wave of concern washing over me despite everything. The neighbor simply shrugged. "I don't really know. They say she has been chronically ill for a long time." For the subsequent months, the bags continued to arrive, always delivered by different people. Never Sharon. I would ask Donald about her health, but he only replied in abrupt monosyllables. "She's sick. She doesn't want to see anyone. Just leave her alone." A year went by, then two, and one afternoon, Donald walked into the house with an expression I had genuinely never seen on his face before. He looked oddly relieved and profoundly sad at the very same time. "Sharon is dead," he announced, sinking heavily into the kitchen chair. I felt a sudden sharp ache in my chest. I hadn't truly known Sharon. We had never shared a meaningful conversation. Yet for 40 years, she had been a fixed, constant, silent presence in the background of my life. And now, she was entirely gone. "I am very sorry," I whispered. Donald nodded once. "She was sick for a long time. It's better this way. She won't suffer anymore." Better this way. What an incredibly cold, dismissive way to speak of the death of your own sister. The funeral service took place 3 days later. It was a dreary, gray day, with a ceaseless, thin rain that seemed determined never to stop. The small church was completely full, much fuller than I would have ever expected. All the elderly folks in town were there, every person who had known Sharon forever. Diane arrived with her husband. She was now 7 months into her pregnancy, and she carried that beautiful internal glow that women have when they are about to bring a new life into the world. She hugged me tightly. She felt strangely tense. "Mom, I'm so sorry about your sister-in-law." "You didn't even truly know her," I reminded her. "I know, but I'm sorry for you." During the ceremony, I noticed something profoundly odd. There was a woman, seated inconspicuously at the very back of the church, who was weeping with overwhelming desperation. She cried the way one only cries for a mother, for a soul who is utterly and profoundly dear. She was roughly my own age, perhaps a few years younger. I did not recognize her at all. After the ceremony was over, as the mourners were filing out, that woman slowly approached the coffin. She knelt down, gently rested her forehead on the polished wood, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she quickly stood up and hurried away, without exchanging a single word with anyone. "Who was that woman?" I asked a neighbor who was standing beside me. She looked at me with an utterly strange, unreadable expression. "You honestly don't know?" "No," I admitted. The neighbor hesitated awkwardly. Then she spoke, her tone clearly cautious. "That is Donna, your his niece." "Niece?" I stopped completely. "Donald has no other siblings besides Sharon. How is it possible that he has a niece?" The neighbor's face instantly flushed scarlet. I honestly thought you knew." "Knew what?" I demanded, but she instantly shook her head and rushed off quickly, clearly afraid she had already revealed far too much. That same evening, Diane finally delivered the fatal, unexpected blow. Her consumer DNA test, which she had taken months ago out of a deeper need to explore her adoptive roots and find any close biological connection, had matched her with a close relative of Donald's, an entirely unknown half-sister. "Mom," she said, her voice strained, "Donna is Dad's biological daughter." I returned home, my head pounding with a burning, impossible heat. Donna. A woman who, based on every known fact of our lives, simply should not exist. I went home with my head on fire. Donna, a woman who shouldn't exist, whose very presence at Sharon's funeral contradicted everything I had built my life upon. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, realizing that my daughter, Diane, in her search for adoptive roots, had inadvertently uncovered a deep family wound. That evening, when we were finally alone, I confronted Donald. "Who is Donna?" I demanded, my voice shaking but firm. He was taking off his jacket, his back still resolutely turned toward me. "Just a relative," he mumbled. "What kind of relative?" I pressed. "A distant cousin. It doesn't matter," he dismissed. "It doesn't matter?" My voice rose sharply, cracking with indignation. "There was a woman at the funeral crying like she had lost her own mother, and you have the audacity to tell me it doesn't matter?" Donald finally turned around. His face was cold, hard, and unyielding. "Mary, enough. It's none of your business." "How can it not be my business? I've been your wife for 56 years, I cried. "And precisely because of that," he countered with brutal finality, "you should know when it is the proper time to simply keep your mouth shut." His words hit me like a physical slap. I sank onto a chair, trembling uncontrollably. And for the first, terrifying time in all those wasted years, I felt something profound shatter inside me. It wasn't just pain. It was a cold, clear, consuming rage that told me I could no longer, under any circumstance, continue to pretend. That night, I did not sleep. I lay awake, staring blindly at the dark ceiling, my mind a relentless reel of every strange thing I had ever ignored. Sharon's fear-filled visits, the mysterious isolated house in the countryside, the unexplained receipts, the money that was always missing. And now, this weeping woman, this half-sister. I realized that all the small, seemingly insignificant oddities of our marriage were actually threads in a massive, ugly tapestry that I had refused to look at. The lack of intimacy, the constant emotional distance, the sterile feeling of the house. I had rationalized them all as the quiet reality of a respectable marriage in a conservative time. Now they were pieces of overwhelming evidence against the man sleeping soundly beside me. I realized he hadn't just lied. He had used me. I was the respectable cover, the proof of his normalcy, the trophy wife who validated his claim to an upstanding life, bought at the cost of his sister's dignity and sanity. The next day, while Donald was out on business, I called Diane. "Sweetheart, I need you to do me one last crucial favor." "Tell me, Mom." "That woman at the funeral, Donna." Can you find out who she really is? Where she lives? I need an address. Everything you can find." Diane, hesitant but loyal, agreed. Her tone was already deeply concerned. "Mom, I know you're upset, but please, be careful. This feels bigger than just a family secret." "It is bigger," I whispered. "It is everything." It took a week, but Diane managed to find the address. Donna lived in a small town 20 miles away. She worked as an elementary school teacher. She lived alone. The information felt solid, anchoring my frantic mind to a concrete reality. I took the bus early on a Tuesday morning. I lied to Donald, saying I had a doctor's appointment. He didn't ask questions, as usual. The lack of concern was one more stab of pain. I arrived in Donna's town and found the school. I sat on a bench outside, waiting until the recess bell rang. Then I saw her. Donna walked out into the courtyard, surrounded by laughing children. She was a gentle-faced woman, her hair pulled back in a soft bun, smiling warmly as she talked to her students. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked towards her. "Excuse me, Mrs. Donna?" She turned. When her eyes met mine, her genuine smile instantly vanished. She paled, recognizing me immediately. You are Donald's wife." "Yes, my name is Mary. May we speak privately?" Donna nervously glanced at the children, then back at me. I truly can't right now. I shouldn't even be talking to you." "Please," I insisted, my voice low and desperate. "I need to understand what is happening." She hesitated for a long, painful time. The weight of her own secret was clearly crushing her. Then she slowly gave in. "Come to my house this afternoon, at 5 o'clock. She quickly gave me her address and hurried away. The afternoon dragged by with agonizing slowness. Every minute felt like an hour of suspended dread. I thought about the sheer volume of secrecy I was about to uncover, decades of silence that had been imposed by Donald and his powerful family. The shame they had placed on Sharon to protect their reputation must have been immense. It made my own decades of lonely marriage seem trivial in comparison to her suffering. When it was finally 5, I was knocking on the door of a small, nondescript house on the edge of town. Donna opened it and let me in without a word. The living room was simple but meticulously cared for. We sat opposite each other, trapped in a deafening silence that felt like forever. "What is it that you want to know?" Donna finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" I demanded, my words sharp with urgency. "Why were you crying as though your heart was breaking at the funeral? Why does Donald insist you're a distant cousin when clearly that is a blatant lie?" Donna looked down, her hands nervously clenching a small handkerchief. "I cannot tell you these things," she said, her voice strained. "It isn't right that you should hear this from me." "Then who should I hear it from? From Donald? He will never admit a thing." "Please, Donna. I am 78 years old. I have wasted my entire life with a man I realize I never knew. I have a right to the truth." She raised her tear-filled eyes to mine. "Sharon was my mother." The world stopped. The sound of her words was deafening in the small room. "Your mother?" "Yes, but no one was ever allowed to know. They all made me out to be a niece, a cousin, anything to completely hide the reality." "But why?" My voice was barely a breath. "Why the terrible need to hide it?" Donna cried silently for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice fractured and raw. "Because my father was Donald." I felt the blood freeze in my veins, the entire room tilting into a dizzying abyss. "What did you say?" "Donald is my father, and Sharon was his own sister. I am the living result of something that should have absolutely never happened." The room spun violently. I had to grip the arms of the armchair to keep myself from falling. "No," I managed to murmur. "No, this is impossible." It is the reality, Donna confirmed, her voice filled with deep-seated sorrow. It is the truth. Sharon was barely 14 years old when it happened. She was just a child. And I was born from that violence. The entire family knew. Everyone knew it. But they chose to hide it. They sent Sharon away to a convent for the pregnancy. When I was born, they took me and forced me to be raised as their niece. Sharon had to pretend I was just an aunt. She couldn't tell me she was my mother. She couldn't hug me. She couldn't love me openly. She was forced to endure and stay silent. Tears streamed down my face, not for myself, but for Sharon. For the sheer, unimaginable cruelty. And Donald? Donald faced zero consequences. The family closed ranks and protected him. They said he was young, that it was a terrible, isolated mistake, and that he needed to carry on with his normal life. So he did. He married you. He lived his respectable life, while Sharon lived out her existence in the shadows, absolutely destroyed by shame and the deepest pain. But the visits, I choked out, my voice ragged. Sharon came to my house every single month. She came to check if there were children, Donna revealed. She came to see if you had given Donald what had been so brutally stolen from her, a normal family, children. She would arrive, and every time she would leave and go home crying, because she saw that you too were childless. And perhaps, in some terrible, twisted way, that offered her a strange consolation. It meant that at least Donald hadn't managed to achieve with another woman what she had been forced to give him. I shot up from the chair. I genuinely couldn't breathe. I need to leave now, I stated. Mrs. Mary, Donna said, rising with me. I'm sorry. I regret that you had to discover this in such a cruel manner, but you asked for the truth. And this is the truth. Donald is a monster, and his family protected him for his whole life. I staggered out of that house. I took the bus back home, but I have absolutely no memory of the journey itself. I only remember arriving home to find Donald sitting at the kitchen table, reading the evening paper, just as he always did. He looked up. Where were you? I stared at him, and for the very first time in 40 years, I finally saw him. I saw the monster who had violated his own sister when she was nothing more than a child. I saw the man who had abandoned her to live in devastating shadow and shame, while he constructed a comfortable, normal life for himself. I saw the man who had lied to me for decades. To the doctor, I replied, using a voice that felt alien to me. I walked straight to the guest bedroom. I closed the door behind me, and I wept until my body was physically empty of tears. I did not sleep that night, or the next. I lay awake in the dark, staring blindly at the ceiling, while right next to me, Donald slept soundly, breathing that heavy, predictable rhythm he always had. How could he possibly sleep so peacefully? How could he close his eyes and find rest, knowing what he had done? Knowing his sister had died, carrying a pain he had inflicted upon her? I got up deep in the middle of the night and went to the dark kitchen. I sat down at the table, trying desperately to process my thoughts. Almost 60 years. Almost 60 years of marriage to a man who had violated his own sister when she was just a 14-year-old girl. 40 years of lies, of those monthly visits which now held a completely horrific meaning. Sharon came to my house every month, not out of any generous spirit. She came to see if I, his legitimate wife, had managed to give Donald the family life that he had brutally ripped away from her. She came to see if there were children in that house, if the rightful wife had the family she had been denied. And every month she retreated, seeing that I, too, was childless. But Sharon did have a child, Donna. A baby born from violence, raised in crippling shame, forced to pretend she was merely a niece or a cousin, all to bury the terrible truth. And Donald's family protected him. Everyone knew. The whole town must have known. yet not a single person said a word. They allowed me to marry that monster, to live with him, to share his bed. A wave of nausea hit me. I rushed to the bathroom. I vomited until there was nothing left. Then I splashed cold water on my face and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back at me was 78 years old, her face marked by time and now by this consuming pain. She was a woman who had wasted her life, a woman deceived, betrayed, and used. When I went back to the guest room, Donald was stirring. "Are you ill?" he asked groggily. I looked at him in the darkness. "No," I stated. "Go back to sleep." And he did. He turned over, and within minutes, he was heavily snoring again. Just like that, as if nothing at all was wrong. The following days were the most excruciating of my entire life. I had to pretend. I had to continue acting normally, preparing meals, cleaning the house, and speaking to Donald as if nothing had fundamentally changed. But inside, something was irreparably broken. Every time my eyes landed on him, I no longer saw the man I had married, but the young man who had taken advantage of his own sister. I looked at his hands, the same hands that had caressed me for years, and thought of them touching a 14-year-old girl. I looked at his mouth, the one that had kissed me, and thought about what else it had been used for. I started sleeping permanently in the guest room. I told Donald his heavy snoring was keeping me awake. He didn't protest. Perhaps he was relieved. I called Diane almost every day. I desperately needed to hear her voice, to cling to something pure amid all this deep moral decay. I still hadn't told her what I'd discovered. Not yet. How could I tell the woman who called him Dad, even if he was her adoptive father, that he was capable of such a thing? "Mom, are you really okay?" Diane asked one day. "You sound distant." "I'm fine, honey. It's just the stress of this time." "Are you sure? Do you want me to come visit?" No. You focus on the baby. How is the baby doing?" Diane laughed. "He kicks like a football player. The doctor says he'll arrive in about 6 weeks." 6 weeks, I repeated. That's wonderful. But I couldn't conjure any real joy. I couldn't feel anything but consuming rage and absolute disgust. A week passed, then another, and I continued to live in that house like a quiet phantom, avoiding Donald as much as humanly possible. He seemed utterly oblivious, or perhaps he noticed, but simply didn't care. He ate, worked, and read his paper. His life went on as usual, because for him, it had always been usual. He had committed a horrific crime decades ago. His family covered it up, and he moved forward as if nothing had happened. No consequences, no punishment. But I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't live next to him, pretending everything was fine. I had to act. But what could I do? Leave him? At 78? And go where? Denounce him? For a crime committed almost 60 years ago? Who would even believe my story? And even if they did believe me, what would it truly change? Sharon was dead. Donna had already lived her life in the shadow of that shame. What could a late denunciation solve now? I needed to know everything, every detail of the cover-up. I needed the concrete, physical proof that Donna had spoken the truth, proof that Donald himself had kept. I was consumed by the need for concrete proof, for tangible evidence of the decades-long cover-up. The weight of the secret felt suffocating. My anger was a cold, constant companion. I needed something more than Donna's heartbreaking testimony. I needed Donald's own complicity laid bare. One evening, while Donald slept soundly in the main bedroom, oblivious, or perhaps simply uncaring, that I was now permanently confined to the guest room, I crept into his study. It was a small, dusty room he used for paperwork, his fiercely private space that I had always respected. But that night, the concept of privacy was meaningless. My need for the truth superseded every old rule. I began to search. I pulled open drawers, rummaged through cabinets, and sifted through old boxes. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I needed confirmation that Donna's devastating account was true. And then I found it. Deep in the back of a drawer, hidden beneath old business invoices, was a worn, manila folder. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, the truth was laid out in cold, brutal detail. There were documents, birth certificates, financial receipts, and, most devastatingly, a stack of unsent letters. The birth certificate for Donna confirmed the basic lie: mother, Sharon; father, unknown. But the financial records told the rest of the story, receipts detailing consistent monthly payments from Donald to Sharon for almost 70 years. It was money to maintain Donna, money to purchase Sharon's absolute silence, money to keep the horrifying secret permanently buried. Then I read the letters. They were written by Sharon to Donald, never mailed, their existence a testament to her silent suffering. I read every single one, the tears streaming down my face, wetting the brittle paper. Donald read one letter, written in a shaky script. Donna turned 10 today. She asked why she doesn't have a father. What was I supposed to tell her? That her father is my own brother? That I was forced to give birth to her after what you did to me? I lied. I told her her father died. But every single lie kills a little piece of me. Another letter revealed the depth of her isolation. Donna desperately wants to know why I can't hug her in public like the other mothers do, why I have to pretend I am only her aunt. I had to invent a story telling her that this is simply how things are done in our family. But she doesn't understand, and I cannot explain the unexplainable to her. I cannot tell her the truth. I cannot tell her she was born from sin, from a violence that utterly destroyed me. A final letter was written near the end. I saw you with your wife today. She was smiling at you. She looked so happy. I wondered if she knows nothing. Perhaps you never told her who you truly are. And I asked myself if I should tell her, if I should go to her house and tell her everything. But then I thought of Donna. If I spoke the truth, everyone would know. And Donna would carry the burden of this shame forever. So I stayed silent, as I have always done, as I will remain silent until the day I die. I wept uncontrollably. I wept for Sharon, for the girl who became a woman without ever being allowed to be a mother. I wept for Donna, who grew up in the crushing shadow of a terrible secret. And I wept for myself, for the decades I had wasted next to a monster. I carefully put the letters and documents back in the folder. I closed the study door. And I returned to the guest room. Sleep was impossible. I kept hearing those final words, as I will remain silent until the day I die. Sharon had kept her promise, carrying the secret to her grave to protect her child. But now, through no fault of her own, the secret had been exposed anyway. The next morning, I was sitting at the breakfast table when Donald came in. He looked at me with a strange expression. "Did you go into my study last night?" he asked. My heart seized. I looked him straight in the eye. "Yes," I said. Lying was useless now. "Why?" "I was looking for some papers," I said. "Which papers?" "The ones you hid for 50 years. The silence that followed was total. Donald slowly put down his coffee cup, his face turned to stone. "You spoke with Donna?" "Yes. You shouldn't have done that." "I shouldn't have?" My voice, finally, was loud. "I shouldn't discover that I married a man who violated his sister when she was 14? I shouldn't know that you destroyed 2 lives? I shouldn't—" "Stop it," he growled. His voice was dangerously low. "You know nothing. You don't know how things were back then." "Then tell me how things were, Donald. Tell me how it was possible for a 22-year-old man to take advantage of his teenage sister." "It wasn't like that," he insisted, but his voice trembled. "No? Then how was it?" He stared out the window, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "Tell me," I insisted. Tell me it's not true. Tell me Donna lied. Tell me Sharon lied in all those letters you kept hidden. Tell me. It was different back then, he exploded. Those were different times. I was young. I didn't know. You were 20, Donald. You were not a child, and she was 14. She was your sister. It was a mistake, he whispered, his voice broken. A moment of weakness. I didn't mean to. A moment? I looked at him with utter disbelief. A moment that destroyed 2 lives. A moment that created a child raised in shame. A moment that caused your sister to suffer her entire life. Donald stood up. I paid for it, he said defensively. I sent money for years. I bought that house for them. You bought her silence, I interrupted, the truth sharp and clean. You did not pay for what you did. You never truly paid. And what do you want me to do now? He screamed, finally losing control. It happened almost 60 years ago. Sharon is dead. Donna has her own life. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell me the truth, the entire truth, how it happened, why it happened, and why your family protected you instead of protecting her. Donald sat back down. He looked suddenly frail, tired. He remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly, painfully, he began to speak. It was the summer of 1956, he said, his voice flat. I was 20. I had recently been released from military training, where I had served for 2 years. I had seen things, disturbing things, discipline, intense pressure, friends breaking down. When I came home, I wasn't the same. I was disturbed. I had nightmares. I was drinking. And Sharon, she had always been a sweet, innocent child. She looked at me with the unwavering faith of a little sister. He paused, his hands shaking. One evening, he continued, I had been drinking, too much, and Sharon came into my room to bring me some water. She was worried about me, and I don't know what came over me. The war, the alcohol, the loneliness. I know it's not an excuse, but in that moment, I didn't think. I didn't think she was my sister. I didn't think she was just a child. I only thought about myself. And then, I asked, my voice icy. And then the family discovered she was pregnant, 3 months later. Sharon hadn't said anything. She had kept silent out of shame. But my mother noticed, and when she asked her who the father was, Sharon finally spoke. And what did they do? My father wanted to kill me, Donald said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Literally, he grabbed his gun and said he would shoot me, but my mother stopped him. She said we couldn't let the scandal get out, that it would destroy the family name, that none of the other siblings would ever be able to marry well. She said Sharon had to go away, have the baby in secret, and then we all had to pretend nothing had ever happened. And Sharon? What did she say? She didn't say anything. She just cried. She cried all the time. But she didn't protest. She was 14. She was terrified. She did what they told her to do. She went to a convent far away, had the baby, and then she came back. And we all pretended that Donna was a niece, the child of a distant cousin who had died in the war. And you? I asked. What did you do? Donald looked down again. I lived with the guilt, every day, every night. I saw Sharon avoiding my eyes, flinching whenever I passed near her. I watched Donna grow up and wondered if she would ever know. And I tried to make amends in the only way I knew how. I sent money. I bought that house for them. I made sure they never lacked for anything. But you never apologized, I stated, knowing the answer. He looked up at me. What difference would an apology have made? Perhaps none, but it was the least you could have done. We sat in silence. Then Donald said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, What will you do now? Will you leave me? Go around telling everyone? I looked at him. This man, broken by guilt and the passing years, this man who had ruined lives, and I asked myself what I truly wanted. Revenge? Justice? And justice for whom? Sharon was dead. Donna had suffered enough. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know what to do. And in that precise moment, the telephone rang. It was Diane. Mom, she said, her voice agitated. The baby is coming. I'm going to the hospital. I'll be right there, I said. Donald looked at me. Do you want me to come with you? No, I said, cold and final. I don't want you to come. I don't want you near my daughter and my grandson. I saw the sharp pain flash across his face, but I didn't care. I grabbed my purse and walked out the door. I drove to the hospital through a blur of rain and headlights, the world outside a frantic reflection of the storm raging inside me. My mind replayed Donald's final desperate plea for me to go with him, his face a mask of sudden raw vulnerability. It was the first time in almost 60 years he'd shown me a flicker of genuine need, and the first time I had met it with absolute, cold indifference. I had walked out, choosing the innocence of my daughter and future grandson over the monstrous guilt of the man I had married. Diane was already in a labor room, her husband pacing the floor with the wide-eyed panic only first-time fathers truly know. Seeing her, my beautiful, strong, and deeply curious girl brought me back, momentarily, from the abyss. I held her hand, focused entirely on her rhythm of breathing and pain, trying to channel the consuming rage I felt into a fierce, protective love. The primal, devastating truth about Donald, Sharon, and Donna was momentarily suspended by the miracle of new life unfolding before us. The birth took place hours later. A girl. 3.5 kilos of pure, innocent life. When the nurse placed the small, warm bundle in Diane's arms, I felt an actual physical thaw in my chest. This tiny new creature, completely unaware of the world's sickness and the crushing weight of old secrets, was a point of light, a new beginning. Diane looked up at me, exhausted but radiating. We're going to call her Sophia, she whispered, a tired but beautiful smile on her face. Do you like it, Mom? It's perfect, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears, realizing that the name, meaning wisdom, felt like an unexpected gift of grace. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days. I slept poorly on a worn, uncomfortable armchair, but I didn't mind. I wanted to be close to Diane and my granddaughter, and more importantly, I wanted to be far away from Donald and the silent, secret-choked house. I needed time to heal, to breathe the clean, hopeful air of a new life instead of the stale, suffocating air of decades of lies. On the 4th day, Diane, looking at me with a worried expression, finally asked the question I knew was coming. Mom, did something happen between you and Dad? I hesitated. I couldn't burden her with the shattering truth right now, not when she was in the fragile, beautiful aftermath of childbirth. Yes, I said, choosing my words carefully. Something happened. But I don't want to talk about it now. This is a happy time. I don't want to ruin it. But are you all right? She pressed. I will be, I promised. And as I said the words, I believed them. The cold clarity of my rage was settling into something hard, something resolute. When I returned to the house, Donald was sitting in the living room, in the dark. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were red and weary. The image of him, slumped and defeated, was a stark contrast to the confident, imposing man I had married. How is Diane? He asked, his voice rough. Fine. She had a girl. And you? When are you going back to them? I'm not, I stated. Diane has her husband. She doesn't need me. Donald nodded slowly. Mary, I wish we could. No, I cut him off. The word a clean break, a final period on a terrible sentence. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear your justifications. I just want to sit here in silence and decide what I'm going to do with my life. And that's what I did. For weeks, I stayed in that house, avoiding him, thinking. I thought of Sharon, of Donna, and of all the lost years. I realized I was still suffering, but this time, the suffering was mixed with a new, potent ingredient, the awareness of complicity by ignorance. Even though I hadn't known the secret, I had been the respectable wife, the cover of normalcy that allowed his monstrous lie to thrive for decades. The need for action became a burning compulsion. Sharon's silent suffering, Donna's hidden life, my own 4 decades of lies, they all demanded justice, a voice. I decided I had to speak, not for revenge, but because continuing my silence would be a betrayal of Sharon a second time. One afternoon, I made my decision. I took the bus, again without telling Donald, and went back to Donna's town. She opened the door, surprised to see me. "Mrs. Mary," she said, "may I come in?" We sat in her simple, clean living room. This time, I spoke first. "I have come to tell you that I spoke with Donald. I know the entire story, and I wanted to tell you that I am sorry." Donna looked confused. "Why are you apologizing? You did nothing wrong." "I'm sorry for not knowing," I insisted, the words tasting like ash. "I'm sorry that for all these years I lived next to that man without knowing. I'm sorry that you had to bear this burden alone." "You were not alone," Donna said quietly. "She had my mother." "Your mother," I repeated, my voice softening with a sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy. "Tell me about her. Tell me what she was like." And Donna spoke. She told me about Sharon, the gentle, sad woman she had been. She spoke of the lullabies sung every night. She spoke of the hidden sweets, bought with the money Donald sent, a desperate attempt by Sharon to be a mother despite the crushing limitations placed upon her. She told me about finding out the truth as a teenager, overhearing a conversation, and then her mother's heartbreaking confirmation. "I was 16, Donna said, her eyes distant with the memory. "I heard my aunt say, 'Poor Sharon, forced to raise her own daughter as if she were a niece.' And I understood. I asked my mother if it was true. She wept and nodded. And then she hugged me so tightly I thought she would break. And she said, 'Forgive me for not being the mother you deserved.'" "And you?" I asked. "I forgave her," Donna said, tears returning, "because I understood that she was a victim too. And from that day on, we tried to make up for lost time. We couldn't tell anyone, but between us, we knew. And that was enough." We cried together, 2 women separated by 3 decades of lies, but now united in the memory of a woman who had suffered in silence. "What will you do now?" Donna asked, drying her eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "A part of me wants to leave Donald, go away, start over. But I'm 78. Where would I go? And another part of me wants him to pay. But how do you make a man pay for a crime committed 60 years ago?" "Perhaps you cannot," Donna said with a quiet wisdom that belied her years. "Perhaps the only thing we can do is live with the truth, stop hiding it." She was right. The time for silence was over. Sharon's silence, meant to protect her daughter, had only allowed Donald to live a peaceful, respected life, while 2 women suffered in the shadows. I returned home that evening with a new resolve. Donald was still sitting in the living room, waiting. He didn't move as I entered. He looked like a man expecting a sentence. I sat opposite him. "We have to talk," I said. He nodded. "I can't go on like this. I can't live in this house, sleep under this roof, pretending everything is normal, because nothing is normal. Nothing ever was." "What do you want to do?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I want the truth to come out. I want everyone to know what you did. I want you to finally pay for what you did to your sister." I saw the flash of panic in his eyes. "No," he pleaded. "No, Mary, you can't. Think about the scandal. It would destroy everyone. Diane, little Sophia, Donna, everyone would suffer." "Donna has already suffered her entire life," I countered. "Diane is strong enough to bear the truth, and Sophia is too young to understand. But I can't carry this secret anymore. To continue to be silent would mean becoming an accomplice to your crime." He got up and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. "If you talk," he said slowly, "you will also destroy yourself. People will say you knew all along. They will say you stayed with me despite everything. They will judge you." "Let them judge me," I said, my voice steady. "I would rather be judged for speaking the truth than live in a lie." He turned, and in his gaze I saw something I'd never seen before: true, profound despair. "Please," he begged, "don't do this, please." It was the first time in almost 60 years I had heard him beg. But his prayers came 60 years too late. "Tomorrow," I said, rising from the chair, "I am going to speak to your niece, Joanna." Joanna was the daughter of Donald's deceased older brother, a pillar of the community, respected, and a leader of the Catholic Women's Association. She was also the one who had carefully avoided me at Sharon's funeral, afraid of uncomfortable questions. "No," Donald insisted, "Joanna knows nothing." I looked at him with an incredulity that had turned to contempt. "Donald, everyone knows. The whole town knows. They have always known. They just pretended not to." That night, I didn't sleep again. I stayed awake, planning what to say, how to say it. I dressed carefully the next morning, wearing my best blue dress. I needed to look dignified, respectable. When I spoke, people needed to take me seriously. I went to Joanna's house. The moment she opened the door, her polite smile froze. I saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear I had seen in Sharon's, now reflected in the eyes of a privileged relative. "Aunt Mary," she said, using the formal term of respect, "may I come in? I need to talk to you about something important." We sat in her elegant living room, filled with old family photos, including one of Donald and me on our wedding day. I looked at the image of the young, unknowing girl I had been next to the man who had expertly concealed his evil. "Joanna," I began, my voice steady and strong. "I know the truth about Sharon and Donna." Her face went white. "I don't know what you are talking about," she stammered. "Yes, you do. Everyone does. And I want to know why no one ever told me. Why you all let me marry Donald without a word of warning." Joanna looked down. "It wasn't our business," she whispered. "It wasn't your business?" My voice rose. "A man who assaulted his own sister, and you thought it wasn't your business to warn the woman he was about to marry?" "It was so long ago," she argued. "He was a boy. It was the war. Times were difficult." "Stop with the excuses." I slammed my hand onto the armrest of the chair. "Stop hiding behind the war, behind difficult times. What he did was a crime, and your family protected him." She finally looked up, tears in her eyes. "Sharon was protected. She was given a house, money, everything she needed." "Everything but dignity," I shot back. "Everything but the right to be a true mother to her daughter. Everything but justice." Joanna stood up. "You can't understand. You weren't there. The family did what was best for her to avoid a scandal that would have ruined our name." "Better for her," I asked, "or better for you? Better to protect your name, your reputation, your honor?" "What do you want, Mary?" she asked, her voice filled with loathing. "Do you want to destroy an old man for something that happened 60 years ago? Do you want revenge?" "I want justice," I said, standing to meet her gaze. "I want the truth to be told. I want Sharon, even in death, to finally have the recognition she deserves. I want everyone to know that she was not a strange aunt. She was a mother. I left her house knowing the entire town would know of my visit by nightfall. The gossip would start, but I no longer cared. As I walked, I saw the looks, the women whispering to their friends, the men avoiding my gaze. They all knew. And now, they knew that I knew. I stopped at the church where I had been married. Inside, I knelt before the altar, trying to pray, but the words wouldn't come. I felt an arm gently rest on the pew beside me. It was Father Michael, the parish priest who had been here for 40 years. "Mrs. Mary?" he asked quietly. "I know why you are here." "Joanna called me. She told me about your conversation. Are you here to tell me to be silent, to think of the family, of the scandal?" "No," he said gently. "I am here to listen to you." And so I told him everything. The letters, Donna's pain, my rage at Donald and everyone who had stayed silent. When I finished, the priest remained silent for a long moment. "What happened to Sharon was a terrible sin, a crime with no justification," he said finally. "And the family was wrong to hide it, to protect the guilty instead of the victim." "Did you know?" I asked. "I learned years later when Sharon came to me for confession. She was destroyed by the pain, by the weight of that secret. And I told her what I thought I should, that she had to forgive, that she had to move on, that God would help her. And today? Do you still think that was the right advice?" He shook his head slowly. "No. Today, I think I should have done more. I should have insisted that the truth be told. I should have protected her, not the family's reputation. But I was young, inexperienced, and I believed that forgiveness was always the answer. Forgiveness cannot exist without truth. It cannot exist without justice," he said. "Sharon was forced to forgive without ever having justice. And that is not forgiveness. It is just another violence." His words validated my core truth. "What should I do, Father?" "You must follow your conscience," he said. "If you feel that the truth must be told, then tell it. But be prepared for the consequences. Not everyone will want to listen. Not everyone will support you. But know this, you are not alone. I will be one of those who will support you." I returned home that afternoon. Donald was sitting at the kitchen table, a plate of untouched food in front of him. "Joanna called. She told me you went to see her." "Yes." "And now? What will you do now?" "I will continue to talk. I will go to everyone who knew. I will ask why they stayed silent. I will demand justice for Sharon." "You will not get justice," he said wearily. "You will only get hatred. People will turn their backs on you. They will call you a traitor. They will say you are destroying a family for revenge." "Perhaps," I said, "but at least I will be able to look at myself in the mirror." That evening, I called Diane. I told her everything. I told her that her DNA test, which had revealed Donna, was the start of a far darker story. I told her the truth about Donald. I heard her catch her breath on the phone. "Mom," she said finally, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "You just need to know. And you need to decide what you want to do with this information. Donald is not your biological father, but he raised you. You have the right to decide if you still want to consider him your father or not." Diane was silent for a long time. "I need to think about it. I need to process all of this." "I know, honey. Take all the time you need." "And you? Are you all right?" "No," I said honestly, "but I will be. Eventually." In the following days, I continued my mission. I went to all of Donald's elderly relatives, the ones who had been there when it all happened. The reaction was always the same: denial, then reluctant admission, then justifications. But slowly, something began to shift. Someone, an elderly cousin to whom Sharon had confessed her pain, started talking. A neighbor who had heard Sharon crying at night. An old family friend who had always wondered why Donna resembled Donald so much. The truth began to spread, not as scandal, but as a slow, inevitable awareness. People began to remember Sharon differently. Not the strange sister who lived apart, but a victim, a woman who had suffered in silence. A week after my visit to Joanna, I got a call. It was Donna. "Mrs. Mary," she said, "I heard what you're doing." Joanna came to me, very angry. She said, "You are telling everyone everything." "It's true," I said. "Are you sorry?" "No," Donna said, and in her voice there was something I'd never heard before. Relief. "No, I'm not sorry. In fact, thank you. Thank you for having the courage that I never had." "It's not too late," I said. "If you want to speak, if you want to tell your truth, I will support you." There was a pause. Then Donna said, "Yes, I want to talk. I want everyone to know who my mother was. I want them to know how much she suffered. And I want them to know what Donald did. Then let's do it together." 2 days later, Donna came to town. It was the first time she had returned since Sharon's funeral. I met her at the bus station. When I saw her step off, I was struck by how much she resembled Donald, the same eyes, the same shape of the face. How had I not seen it before? We went together to the town's main cafe, the one where all the elderly people gathered. When we walked in, the conversation stopped. Everyone stared. We sat at a table in the center, ordered coffee, and then, with a clear and firm voice, Donna began to speak. "My name is Donna," she said, "and I am here to tell you the truth about my mother, Sharon." The silence in the cafe was absolute. No one moved. "All my life," Donna continued, "I was led to believe that my mother was my aunt. I was told that my father had died in the war. I was made to live a lie because the family wanted to hide a crime. Donald's crime, who, when he was 20, violated his 14-year-old sister. I was born from that violence. And my mother lived her entire life in the shadows, destroyed by the shame of something she did not choose." An old woman in the cafe began to weep. "I'm not here to ask for pity. I'm not here to cause a scandal," Donna finished. "I am here to tell the truth, because my mother deserves for the truth to be told. She deserves for everyone to know that she was not a strange, sad spinster. She was a mother who loved her daughter but couldn't show her that love. She was a victim who was forced into silence." She stood up. "That is all I had to say. Thank you for listening." I followed her out of the cafe. Outside, Donna was trembling. I hugged her tight. "You were so brave," I said. "No," she said. "I was free. For the first time in my life, I was free." That evening, I returned home. Donald was sitting in the living room. Next to him was a suitcase. "I'm leaving," he said. I looked at him, surprised. "Where?" "To my cousins in Chicago. I can't stay here anymore. I can't bear the looks, the whispers. You won, Mary. You got what you wanted." "I didn't win anything," I said, "and I didn't want anything but the truth." He picked up the suitcase. He stopped at the door. Without turning, he said, "I'm sorry for everything, but mostly I'm sorry that you had to find out. You could have lived your whole life without knowing." "And would that have been better?" I asked. "To live in a lie?" He didn't answer. He opened the door and walked out. I watched him walk away into the evening, dragging his suitcase. And I felt not pain, not anger, but only an immense relief. He was finally gone, and I was finally free. The days after Donald's departure were strange. The house was silent, too silent. For almost 60 years I had grown accustomed to his noises, the heavy steps, the morning cough, the rustling of the newspaper. Now there was only silence. And in that silence, I finally began to hear my own voice. I expected the town to turn against me, to point fingers at the woman who had destroyed a respectable family. Instead, the opposite happened. At the market, an elderly woman who had been Sharon's schoolmate approached me. "Mrs. Mary," she said, her voice trembling, "I want you to know. I knew. I knew about Sharon, and I am ashamed that I did nothing. I am ashamed that I kept silent." She wasn't the only one. Others came to me to apologize, to tell me what they remembered of Sharon, or to confess that they, too, had always suspected something strange about Donna's story. It was as if my decision to speak had opened a dam. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk about Sharon. They wanted to remember her not as the strange sister, but as a victim, a mother who had been denied the right to love her child openly. Diane came to visit a week later. She hugged me tightly. "Mom," she said, her eyes red and face tired, "I haven't slept since you told me. I can't stop thinking about it." "How could he do that and then live normally?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Get married, raise a daughter, me, as if nothing happened." "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe he convinced himself it really was just a youthful mistake. People are good at deceiving themselves." "And you?" Diane asked. "How do you live with this? How do you know you spent almost 60 years with him?" "It's not easy," I confessed. "Every day I wake up and I have to remember that the man I thought I knew never existed. He was just a mask. But you know what? Now that he's gone, for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe." "Are you happy?" Diane asked. I paused. Happiness was such a grand, absolute word. Could I be happy after everything? "I don't know if I'm happy," I said honestly. "But I am at peace. And perhaps, at 78, peace is more important than happiness." The next step was inevitable. I needed a legal separation from the man who was no longer my husband in any real sense. "I'm going to talk to a lawyer," I told Diane. "I want a divorce." She nodded immediately. "I'll help you. Anything you need, I'll help you." The divorce proceeded smoothly. Donald, still living in Chicago, signed all the papers without protest. He never returned to town. I, on the other hand, began to truly live for the first time in years. I moved out of the old house, that tomb of secrets, and found a small apartment near the center of town. It was small, but it was mine. Completely mine. Diane helped me move. While packing, we found old wedding photos, letters, objects that told a false story. "What do you want to do with them?" Diane asked, holding a photo of us smiling outside the church. I looked at the image of the unknowing girl I had been. "Burn them," I said. "Burn everything. I want to start from scratch." And so we did. In the backyard, one spring evening, we burned it all. As the flames consumed the past, I felt something release inside me. It was as if those flames were not only burning paper and photographs, but also the pain, the anger, the shame. "How do you feel?" Diane asked. "Free," I said. "For the first time in my life, I feel free." In my new apartment, I started painting lessons, an old dream, and went to the theater with new friends. Donna became a constant presence in my life. She was more than a friend. She was like a sister, a confidant. We spoke of Sharon, of the past, and also of the future. Donna had decided to write a book about her mother's story. "I want people to know," she told me. "I want my mother's story to be known. It's the story of so many women who were silenced." A year after Donald's departure, I received a call. It was his cousin. "Mrs. Mary," he said gravely, "Donald is in the hospital in Chicago. He had a heart attack. The doctors say he doesn't have long." He was asking for me. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to let him die alone as he had let Sharon live alone. But I went, not for him, but for myself, to finally close that chapter. I found him in a hospital bed, thin and pale. He looked like he had aged 20 years in a few months. "Mary," he said, his voice weak, "you came." I sat beside him. "I am so sorry. For everything. For Sharon. For Donna. For you. For all the lies. Apologies change nothing," I said simply. "I know, but I wanted you to know that I lived with the guilt every single day of my life." He tried to justify it one last time, calling it an error. My voice, though, was firm. "It was a choice, Donald. You chose to violate your sister. You chose to protect yourself instead of protecting her. You chose to live your life while she gave up hers." He closed his eyes and tears ran down his cheeks. "You are right. I deserved to die alone, hated, without forgiveness." Watching him cry, I felt a faint shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a comprehension that made him human. He had committed a terrible crime, but he was also a man who had lived with that crime for 60 years. "Donald," I said, "I cannot forgive you. Only Sharon could have done that, and she died without ever having the opportunity. But I can tell you this. You paid. You finally paid." He opened his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. His final request was simple. "Donna, can you tell her? Can you tell her I'm sorry? That I wish I had had the courage to be her father?" "I'll tell her," I said. Donald died 3 days later. No ceremony, no funeral. He was cremated, his ashes scattered. He disappeared just as he had lived his final months, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone to mourn him. When I told Donna of his death and his last words, she was silent. "It's too late for apologies." It was always too late. But at least now it's over. Now we can truly move on. And she was right. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an end. And sometimes an end is all you need to start again. Donna's book, In the Shadow, The Story of a Hidden Mother, was published in the fall. It was a raw, honest account of Sharon's life. At the book launch, the room was full. After Donna spoke, I was asked to say a few words about my experience as Donald's wife. I stood up, my legs trembling, and looked at all the faces waiting for my words. "It's not easy for me to be here," I began, "but it is necessary, because for too long we were silent. We allowed the victims to carry the burden of shame while the guilty lived peacefully. I lived 40 years next to a man who committed a terrible crime, and I didn't know it. But that doesn't make me innocent, because the moment I discovered the truth, I had to choose. I could have continued to be silent, to protect the family's reputation, to live in a lie, or I could speak, and I chose to speak. I am 78 years old. Many would say I should have stayed quiet, accepted it, endured it, because that's what we were always taught. But I say, it is never too late to tell the truth. It is never too late to choose justice over silence. It is never too late to start over." The applause that followed was deafening. I look at my life now. Donna and I are friends, sisters in an unexpected way. She is a constant presence, and we support each other. Diane and her husband often bring little Sophia to visit. The little girl runs around my new, bright apartment, a living symbol of new life and the hope that finally fills my rooms. Diane wants Sophia to know Sharon's story when she is old enough. "I want her to know that a courageous woman in our family endured the unbearable," Diane said. "And I want her to know that her grandmother had the courage to tell the truth." I am 78 years old. I discovered a truth that turned my life upside down. But I am living the most authentic life I have ever known. I found my voice. I found my freedom. And I found my peace. I know there are women living this today. Women who carry the weight of terrible secrets, who live next to men they don't truly know, who are afraid to speak for fear of scandal or loneliness. To them, I want to say, You are not alone. Your story deserves to be heard. Your truth deserves to be told. And it is never too late to set yourself free. It takes courage, it takes strength, it will take pain. But on the other side is freedom, and freedom is worth any price. Thank you for listening to me today, for allowing me to share with you this intimate chapter of my life. If my story has touched you, please don't hesitate to leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel to discover other testimonies like mine. And please share it, because who knows? Maybe someone going through a similar trial right now will find the courage to keep searching, to hope, to believe in the impossible. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me.